Well, welcome into another episode of the Storyworld Podcast. Steve Schramm here. My boy Al. What's up, man?
Feels good to be back in the studio
Yeah,
but not with Steve because we're always in different locations.
this is true. This
At
is
some
true. We
point,
used
we'll
to,
have to come together, do an in-person one.
yeah. The internet's just so magical. It's kind of like it's like you're right there. So
Maybe
I
we
don't know.
just change up our backgrounds to match so it just looks like that we're in the same room.
Yeah, I could like take a screenshot of yours without you in it, and then put.
Exactly.
Yeah, see, I like that. That's
What are
probably
we
a really bad
talking-
idea.
What are we talking about tonight, Steve?
Hopefully not that anymore. So
Yeah, that's done.
I no time like the present, I have finally finished the Harry Potter series. Me and my wife watched it, and it was an undertaking, but boy, it was fun. It was great. It was really exciting. And so I think we're gonna kind of have 3 or 4 parts even to this episode. So first we're gonna take a minute to talk about a episode, or not an episode, but a movie that we missed in our episode on rating movies by cuts of meat, which if you're listening to this and you have not yet listened to or watched the
Highly
episode where we
recommend.
rate our movies by cuts of meat, it is the best. You've
It's a
got to
meaty
go.
episode. There's a lot to dig into there.
It's very meaty. No gristle.
No.
So it's very good. So we're gonna do that, and we're gonna talk about Harry Potter. Just have a real organic discussion about Harry Potter. So if you're into Harry Potter, I think you're really gonna like this one. We're gonna just really dig into some of the cool themes and talk through what we liked and what we didn't like. And Alex is a pro. Alex knows his Harry Potter inside and out. So this should be an exciting discussion. And then I think we're gonna maybe talk a little bit about the future Harry Potter series and what we're expecting. And if you don't know about that, it's coming. And do some updates at the end. So, an action-packed episode, Alex, for our
We
viewers.
got a lot going on. Maybe we can get it done in less than 3 hours. I don't know. We'll see.
I sure
what we
hope
can
so.
do. We'll see.
I sure hope so. But I think it's going to be fun. So,
All right, so Joker. And again, Steve mentioned our last episode about rating movies by cuts of meat. But if you haven't listened to our Joker review episode where we didn't have this final category, we still gave our Joker review. So go back and take a listen to that if you want to. But we're just going to do a
100%.
quick layout and give our final verdict on it.
yeah.
Our meter.
How about Alex? How about you take the lead on this one?
I'll take the lead on this one.
Okay.
So we kind of came up with some categories too to judge a movie by. Again, we have such a big episode. I'm gonna try and get to this quick. Definitely a big fan of the movie. I think it was done really to perfection. In many respects. I mean, right out of I think the thing that it focuses on the most is on the character side of it. Of course, we got Joaquin Phoenix playing Joker, Arthur Fleck, and just does a phenomenal job. I think he must be in every scene of that movie, or very rarely is he not.
Yeah.
And in several scenes, he's on his own, just doing his own thing, and really sucks you into the character. And then any other character that's involved, whether it's kind of one of the main side ones or one of the lesser ones, it really wraps you in. The actors did a phenomenal job. Character development and growth was really good. It's one of those ones where Arthur Fleck is kind of a crazy guy, but you end up feeling for him. And again, we covered that in our review, but phenomenal. The plot, the story, it's funny how you can cram so much in just, 2.5 hour movie. And go from him being this kind of innocent guy with, some mental issues to the ultimate finish of that movie. I think there's only one downside that I had to it. And I was thinking about when we were making our categories, the emotional response to it, even though during the movie, you definitely feel some emotional tugs, there's some intense moments, then you feel for Arthur, and it definitely, stirs up some emotions. But at the end of the movie, when the movie is over, those emotional strings just kind of cut away. And I don't really 30 minutes later, I'm not thinking about Arthur Fleck anymore. I'm thinking about chores around the house or doing this or that. It doesn't quite linger with me as other movies do. Does that make sense? And I wonder what your kind of thoughts are on that. Maybe you can go too before I give my final.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense to me. I think, it's definitely not something that keeps me up at night, necessarily thinking about it. But in the moment, I have to say, as far as the like emotional response, in the moment, it was a very heavy emotional response for me personally, just because I understood, and we talked about this in the review, but um, I saw a lot of what is part of my daily experience thinking about marketing psychology.
Yeah.
I sort of saw that happening in the moment with this character in the movie, and I thought, wow, this is like insanely powerful stuff when you watch the sort of the building of a tribe, if you will, in real time, and just watching these people look for somebody to identify as the leader of their movement and rise up and be willing to say the thing that nobody else was willing to say. And so, yeah, it didn't. And a lot of the movies that we watch, not all of them, but a lot of them almost leave you at the end with like a puzzle to be solved. And certainly Interstellar and Memento and the other one that keeps slipping my mind.
Prestige.
Prestige, yeah. I don't know why that keeps slipping my mind. All of those are like, in a sense, mysteries to be solved. That like by the end of the movie, I wasn't quite like I didn't know what was going on. Whereas with the Joker, I don't think necessarily you have that, right? I don't think you have that need to figure it out and know, because you saw what happened. If anything, you're just like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. And so I guess all that to say, there was a very wordy way to say I did have an emotional response, and I think it was consistent with the category intent of the movie. And so, for me, I was on board, but I totally agree. Obviously the plot was fantastic. I don't know how much I'm into the Marvel or the DC. Like I'm into the idea of how a lot of these shows and movies pull from the comic books and stuff as original inspiration. But I've got zero idea what the Joker movie that we watched had to do.
Yeah, gotcha.
With book inspiration or whatever. I haven't watched any of that. So I don't know how much of the plot was like pieced together or directly inspired by old comic books or whatever. But as far as the plot of the movie that I could see, I thought it was just fantastic. And the character development is, of course,
It's so good.
on point, right? It's really good. And I think if everything else in the movie was terrible, which it wasn't, but even if it was, the character development and the, and even part of the plot, like having to do with developing the character about how he was like seeing people in his head that weren't really there, and like having these relationships with them that didn't really exist. And right down to all of those little details, I just thought it was fantastic.
Awesome, Steve. Yeah. Aside from that little nitpicky thing that I had, I'm gonna have to give it a steak rating on my chart, Steve.
Yeah,
it's one of those movies where it's difficult to find a flaw in the movie. It's one of those kind of perfect setup movies,
100%. And I'm totally with you there. I'm a steak on this one all the way. I think it was absolutely wonderful. In fact, I can't imagine giving it a mere hamburger. I think that would be a tremendous injustice. So, yep, steak on Joker. It was really good, and I would watch it again ASAP. So, yeah.
Yeah. They're coming out with the second one?
I heard that, I think.
It doesn't sound appealing to me, but I'll obviously give it a shot. I'm going to botch the name of the title. It's a French name, Folie à Deux or something like that. Something about a song, but it's supposed to, it has Lady Gaga playing Harley Quinn, and it's supposed to be a musical. I am not a fan of any sort of musicals. If there's like one of my favorite shows and there's one of those musical episodes, I'll skip it. I don't care for that.
I thought those were awful.
But given how great the first one was, I'll obviously give it a shot.
It's worth giving a shot. No, I just had a completely unrelated thought to Joker, but another meter thought. Okay.
That's it.
Did we ever do an episode covering Dune?
No, because we watched it in theaters like 3 months before we started this podcast, so we need to rewatch that. And with the ones coming out in theaters at the end of the year, maybe the next couple months, we watch it again.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that because I thought, gosh, I feel like if we've talked about Dune and we didn't rate Dune, that would be terrible.
Yeah,
but
we
we haven't
haven't done
talked
an
about it
episode.
on the podcast yet.
We haven't
Okay.
yet. We'll have to
Cool.
rewatch that one time.
Yeah, we need to rewatch that, and then we can do that one, a full episode review with the meter too.
Yeah,
Man, I'm really excited now.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right. So
Cool.
moving on to the land of magic, Steve.
Man, the wizarding world.
I just want to
Wizarding world.
say how ecstatic I am that you have finally read the first couple books, but then watched all the movies. I was thrilled that you just creamed right through those.
I know. I'm so pumped. I feel like, and it was good. Like me and my wife, we'd sit down and we knocked out we knocked them out pretty quick. I mean, we covered this over just a month or two, and got all the Harry Potter movies done. And man, they are just all awesome. I loved the progression. I loved everything. I loved the progression of the characters throughout. I loved obviously the story. I think, did you mention something about that? J.K. Rowling, like basically the entire plot for the whole thing came to her at once or something. Is that accurate? Did you hear about that or say that? Or?
Something about the main thing. I think as the story goes, she was on a train ride and it kind of came to her all at once. Not every little bit of it, of course, but
of course, yeah.
But like within like one train ride or within a certain small amount of time, like a lot of it just kind of landed on her.
Isn't that interesting?
So that's pretty cool.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah. It's really awesome.
I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I'm just curious. What, out of all 7, well, I guess 8 movies, because the last book is 2 movies, what was your favorite one?
Oh, man. What was my favorite one? Okay. So, I'm going to have to speak in very generalist terms here because, like, again, having only seen them once, like, I don't even know which title is which without looking at them. Okay.
That's true. So I guess maybe your favorite segment of the story that you remember that really stood out to you.
Yep. So I would say it's somewhere between movies 2 and 3, maybe even number 3. For one specific reason. The thing I didn't like about the later movies as they got darker and darker and all of that, there was less, and this was intentional, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. There was less of like the Hogwarts and the and the stuff that happens, like the Quidditch matches and the just the houses and all that fun stuff. And I think where the problem is like growing up. So I had some friends who were like really into Harry Potter. Like I had this one friend who wrote all these fan fiction stories and everything. And so I would just always be reading about this or whatever. I never actually watched the thing.
Yeah, that's funny.
But I was around it a lot. And so I would, you would always hear talk about, oh, well, what house are you? What house are you? And this, that, the other thing. And so, I like how, so I think it's definitely fair to say, and you've mentioned this to me before, and I totally, picked up on this, that the first movie, while of course good, and like almost the whole movie is an exercise in setting up the world. Like it's an exercise in contextualization. Yeah, exactly right. Same thing for the book. It definitely leaned more on the kid spectrum. I mean, Harry was a kid at the time, and it all, and so, but as they got darker, there was less of like the overall world, if you will, and like it really zoomed in on like specific characters and stuff, and that's all well and good, but like I guess I missed elements of like it's like there are a couple. Is it fair to say there's like 1 or 2 of them where they're like basically not even at Hogwarts at all? Maybe it's like 5 or 6. It's like not even a thing. And then the
last 2 movies, there is no Hogwarts until the end, and that's true in the book. But yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of they have to strip it down to the story's core elements. But kind of related, but shifting gears a little bit. But that's why I'm really excited about the HBO series coming out. Because assuming that each episode is around an hour, rather than having a 2.5-hour movie per year, you're going to have 3 times the length of that. And so you're going to get that Hogwarts aspect each time, or those even, I would argue. So, the fourth episode with the Triwizard Tournament, the Goblet of Fire. Remember that?
Yeah.
So that happens to be a lot of people's favorite book and movie. That's just a really popular one. It's not mine, but it's still up there. The book is phenomenal, but if you're a fan of the books, it tends to be one of the movies that you really dislike a lot, because not only are there a lot of Hogwarts stuff that are stripped down, but even a lot of not necessarily essential plot elements, but very important ones that when they go missing, it's just very bothersome. So having those like 8 hours for a season, honestly, you'll be able to cover every little bit of what's in that book. That's plenty of time to do that all.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason why I'm looking for it. Because I totally agree with you. As much as I love the progressiveness of the movies and everything, you're right. Towards the end, I mean, you're really getting down to the exact story, and anything other little details that Rowling might put in her books just for kind of fun stuff to put in, get stripped away.
Yeah, and that's as you said that's kind of what I was thinking, is like it's almost like it loses some of the fun. And I know the story gets darker, and so it kind of has to. But like, you talk about like you talk about the wizarding world, and if you go to Universal, it's like all like they've got the whole Hogwarts land or whatever it's called. I don't even know what it's called, but the whole and so there's so much to the world. But I just found it kind of funny that like after number 4, the world, if you will, gets very like in the background, if it's even there at all, and it's really just about what's happening to the characters, which again, fine. Like I love the characters. I mean, I thought they were great. This is not necessarily a bad thing at all. This is just like the reason why like 2, 3, 4, why those are my favorite, is because they had a little more of the maturity aspect, and like the story was starting to definitely develop a little bit more. But it still had that overall world feel.
Yeah.
To continue on this, but also to change subjects a little bit, of one of my favorite things throughout, and like why as they went on, I was sort of like missing this. I just like it took probably getting to the third movie to like be like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. But like the like I thought it was a nice touch that like the defense against the dark arts teacher is always the bad guy, right? And so like it was kind of like, oh, okay, I see. And so now I know what to expect. And so it's kind of like revealing something ahead of time, but it gets you excited for it, because it's like, oh, okay, I can't wait to see how this gets screwed up.
How is this guy going to get screwed up? Yeah.
Yeah. And especially the one where, gosh, I forget which one it was, of course, but the one where like the guy was like the big fat guy with the glass eye, and he, I was like, there's no possible way that this guy could be, and then it turned out he was, but he wasn't, the bad guy. And so, that was a fun thing, that again, you just didn't really get that as in those later episodes, because they just weren't focused on that. Right. And so it was one of those fun elements that anyway, but I loved that about them. I thought that was a really clever little thing that she did there.
I forgot if it was in the movie or the book, or maybe both. I forget, but in the Half-Blood Prince, where Snape is announced to be the new Defense Against Dark Arts teacher, I think Ron makes a comment of, well, at least we know Snape will be gone by the end of the year. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that's pretty clever.
So that's pretty clever. Another thing, too, on the seriousness of the movies that I actually just thought of, not just the darker tone of the story, but just as the kids maturing, too. So I guess it applies to anything. Think about whether it's college, or you first get married, or any type of new environment you're in, or if you're a kid, you get so excited about like your first place into something, or your first time, like, wow, look at this. And then think about 2 years go by, 3 years go by, even if you end up being in a magical place, once you kind of get used to that, it just becomes the norm. And so it does, even aside from the story getting serious, it makes sense as the kids get older, and then everything is more the same to them in their world. that
Yeah.
things are just going to have a more natural tone, I guess.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's like because it is hard to pinpoint what could have been done differently. So I don't think I necessarily would have wanted it to be different. It's just
Yeah.
one of those things that I noticed. Like they haven't even, it's like
I get,
you know,
I could picture Steve putting on the first Harry Potter just on repeat, never getting past the first one.
right,
Just watching
right,
the first
right.
movie all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I also thought that it was weird that like you don't even interact with the bad guy until the very last scene of the first movie, and so I thought that was weird too. And so I don't
It's
know.
very different.
It's different. It is
And
different, and
even
in an
after the
interesting
first,
way.
even after the first movie, it, it's it's very, even though he's confronted with Voldemort, who's kind of fused himself with Professor Quirrell there. It even at that little bit, you still don't feel the weight of the seriousness of it. You just think, okay, so he's going to be the bad guy, and what's next? And it's really not. The second one gets pretty dark pretty quickly, actually. For as light as a movie the second one starts out to be, it gets pretty dark with the Chamber of Secrets being open, and then after that, it she has a pretty quick progression into the seriousness of it, especially the fourth one. That's when Voldemort gets his body back, and there's a lot of pretty kind of
That's pretty
brutal stuff
crazy.
there. Yeah, so
Yeah, that's a crazy one. Yeah.
it really is. Is there anything about the movies that you absolutely did not like, as far as not necessarily how the movie was filmed, but the actual story that J.K. Rowling wrote? Was there anything that you didn't care for or thought was kind of off-putting or that you would change?
Man, that's a really good question. I'm having trouble thinking of anything that falls into that category other than what I've already mentioned. Um, you know, right off the bat. I mean, I feel like it was very well executed. Obviously, I mean, she's one of the most fantastic writers,
Mhm.
ever. I mean, I did find it interesting that like, and this is probably a nothing burger too, but like since I'm just catching up on all of this stuff, like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, like all at the same time, I'm like noticing things. So like I noticed how like both Voldemort and um the bad guy in the Lord of the Rings are both called the Dark Lord. And
Mm.
and so I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, it seems like one was written a long time before the other, and so maybe they're kind of like piggybacking off of that, or maybe that's just a generic term, like the biblical term Elohim or whatever. Maybe it's just fair enough
Mm.
to call any of them a dark lord. But
What's funny? My dates might be a little bit off, but it's been about 25 years or so since Rowling came out with the first book. And I think she worked on it for a few years. So it was like early to mid 90s, I believe, that she was formulating all these thoughts. I believe early 90s. The Lord of the Rings didn't come out, I think, till 57,
right,
I think. And so there's almost as much difference between now when Rowling wrote her first book and was singing about it versus when Rowling was singing about this stuff when Lord of the Rings came out. Not quite, but
no, it's kind of funny.
so even though it was still 35 years or so between her and Lord of the Rings, that's a lot closer than one
Yeah.
would think.
Yeah, that's really crazy, huh? To think about that. It's like, anyway, it's
Yeah,
it's like those posts you see on. Well, you're not on Facebook right now, which is God bless you. I'm glad you're not. I wish I
very
wasn't.
helpful.
I bet. I bet. But it's like you see these posts that are like, by the way, when you were in the early 2000s talking about classic rock or whatever,
Yeah.
like to people, to kids today, like 90s music is classic rock. And I'm just like, okay, I hate you. I'm so mad that you pointed that out.
Yeah.
Now I feel ultra old and I don't know how it happened because I was just in my grandparents' backyard playing basketball like three minutes ago.
The two weird ones for me are when they say this is what we think video game graphics looks like in 2002, and this is what they actually look like. And it's so crazy. Then the other one is every once in a while I'll see, whether it's a family member or something on social media or whatever, someone born in 2005 or 6 having like 2 kids or something. Obviously they're really young, but just some weird
Yep.
stuff about getting old.
I know, man. Getting old is weird, especially with the internet now to remind you of how old you are. Like every it's weird. So,
it's speaking along those lines of the time stuff. I think we kind of mentioned this before. Maybe I wonder how differently Rowling's books would have looked if she had the idea or started writing them when cell phones became a larger thing. Just with how just a couple different aspects. One, like people discovering who wizards are. Think about today with ring cameras and just so many different technological stuff. And then plus, and even for the 90s, and this is something I'm sure that there's explanations for it. I get it, but the fact that it's very common in the wizarding world to deliver post by owl.
Yeah.
It's very silly when with cell phones, but even then people had landline phones, and sure, it was more difficult, but you had email, landline phones, and all this kind of stuff. Honestly, that's probably the one aspect of all the Harry Potter stuff that just bothered me the most. I was just always so frustrated reading the books and seeing Harry write a letter to Sirius and then not thinking it would get there like in 5 or 10 days or however long. And just waiting another 5 or 10 days for a response.
Well, it's kind of weird too, because not only was it set like in modern day, like, which was obvious from the settings and like right. I mean, I'm not wrong about that, right? It was set in like
the movies. I believe the movies actually do take place around 2000 time.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Like if you look at the buses and the cars and like the cities in those times when they are in, Muggle land, if you will.
Right.
It looks like, accurate, right? Accurate time period.
Yep.
And so like when you consider that they, as wizards, you would think like there's kind of two things going on, right? Because you would think that, we talk about technology as magic, right? And like, there's this idea that it's like what they used to think was called magic. Now we just call it technology, right? And so you would almost think that like somebody with the power to do actual magic would be in some ways more technologically advanced. But then like at the same time, and I guess this is actually something that maybe she should be commended for, at the same time, she is able to give the wizarding world this air of tradition, where you're talking about witches and wizards, and you're talking about like, these big castles and everything. And so it's almost like in some ways the wizarding world takes you back to a more primitive time. And yet they are more advanced in what they can do. And so it's, it's kind of strange and it's part of the allure of it all, I think, probably, but it is kind of interesting.
I agree. I do like what you brought up, the wizarding, like tradition stuff. And you kind of, even if it's not addressed directly, you still kind of have that feeling while watching it. Another thing too, that always kind of boggled my mind, and it's just another thing that seems weird to me, and maybe you have thoughts on it. So I'm sure it's been addressed elsewhere, but I'm not one to skim Reddit 24/7. So, according to Rowling, and I don't know if she said this a year ago or 20 years ago when she was first writing the books, but in the United Kingdom, so Hogwarts has, I think, like 300 to 400 students, around 400. It's something like that. I could be a little off. And so that means that all the wizards in the whole United Kingdom is no more than like 5,000, like maybe 3,000 to 5,000 people.
Yeah.
And then different parts of the world have their own, like Germany has their own school, Japan, all around the world they are, but that's just the UK portion. And I always thought it was weird that, 3,000 people, even if you say 5,000, it's not a lot of people. I grew up in a town of 5,000 people, and it's just, it's hardly anything when you think about it. Yet in the wizarding world, they have the Ministry of Magic, where if you look at the scenes, you feel like that it's a mini city of wizards working there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't take into account all the wizards in different towns that are living that don't work there. And watching the movie just feels like you would think that there's 100,000 wizards,
right,
like one area. Whereas in reality, just calculating the students at the school, in the math that J.K. Rowling did, there's only a few thousand people. And that's another something that has never really connected in my mind, never really connected the dots. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I wasn't prepared to think about math. That's interesting.
Just think without even her words, just kind of looking at naturally, if there's like 400 students or so at Hogwarts, you don't have more than 4,000 to 6,000 wizards in the whole UK. Yet watching the movies, you feel like that there's thousands of wizards.
Yeah.
Just
it feels huge.
Just an odd thing that I've never been able to really connect.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and especially when you consider like, Diagon Alley and like just the different places they go. It's like, yeah, this looks like this huge, because 4,000 to 6,000 people or so is nothing. I mean, just a complete nothing burger.
Yeah, you're right.
So,
if you just look at Diagon Alley and all the people there that, you must have half the wizards there then at any given time, but then you also must have at least half in the Ministry of Magic working. So where does that leave all the other jobs and wizards? And anyway,
yeah,
that's an interesting thought.
But that wouldn't include like the, the elves and the goblins and all that.
Right. It does exclude that.
Yeah. So it's like there are more than just wizards and witches, if you will. The in the
speaking of elves, something interesting. That's probably one of the biggest criticisms of the movie is, again, they kind of had to strip it for time and everything, but the elves actually play a really big part in the books, and specifically Dobby. Even though he shows up throughout the movies quite often, he appears in the books probably 2 or 3 times as much as he does in the movies in some pretty big ways too.
Really,
specifically the 4th book. And so without a doubt, that will be shown in the television series. So I'm excited, really excited.
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting.
Be really cool.
Yeah, I find, again, I'm able to make some comparisons here just because of how fresh all of this stuff is for me. But like, I find it so interesting how differently an elf is predicted in the works of Harry Potter than it is in the Lord of the Rings. When I think of elves, if you will, in the Lord of the Rings, it's a completely different, kind of feel. And like a lot of the magical and mystical, like when Dobby breaks in there, that I guess it's the last movie, or second to last movie, when Dobby breaks in and, rescues them, he's like, of course I can just randomly show up here. I'm an elf.
Right.
It's like, excuse me, I wasn't aware that you could just do anything you wanted because you were an elf. I didn't know elves were God. So no, but it was really kind of like, and I'm guessing the books flesh that out more. But until he said that, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't have any clue what kind of power was bestowed upon free elves.
Yeah, I forget specifically what the books say on it, but the elves' magic is like innate to them. They don't have to like learn it or have a wand, and it's really powerful stuff. I forget the whole specifics of it, but some interesting things there. Speaking of the Lord of the Rings elves, have you ever seen the depiction of them in some of the old cartoons that came out like at the 70s?
I think you've showed me some.
The elves are like these like hunched over blue creatures, and they're like creatures, not man-like humanoids. It's very, very interesting, the depictions that they've had sometimes.
Man, yeah, kind of crazy.
So the big question: what did you think of the Snape's character development in his final? For the last movie?
I had a feeling that things weren't as they appeared, but I didn't understand how to put all of that together.
Yeah.
And so I was actually quite glad to see it turn out the way that it did, because I really did want to think that Snape was a good guy, right? And I was really upset when it was starting to look like Snape was not a good guy.
Yeah. Made you feel really good at the end. A real feel good part.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'll be honest, kind of weird, kind of a little love triangle thing going on there with Snape and James and Lily. Kind of weird. But it's clear that he cared for Harry quite a bit. And, interesting how kind of, like having to keep a distance and all of that, was kind of odd.
That's one of the things that, again, the movie depict so well is you kind of said like the love triangle. In a sense, that's true, but um, I think the movies touch on it a little bit. But in the books, when Harry looks in the pensieve with
Yeah.
Gandalf, Dumbledore, and then also when he kind of remember he taps into Snape's memory that was they're practicing occlumency. So I forget exactly where during the line. It might even been with Snape's memory. He gave it to Harry at the end, but it really shows how Snape and Lily, Harry's mother, developed a friendship before they even went to Hogwarts together.
Right.
So they were friends long before she even met James. And over the summers, they were friends together. And so that's why. And so so when she finally started to show an interest in Harry's dad, that just kind of really de-escalated him and really, affected him a lot.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but cool that, ultimately he was still looking out for Harry the whole time.
Yep.
And, I thought it was good. So I liked that. I was really glad that Snape ended up, being one of the good guys, and it kind of showed you, behind the scenes of some of the different things of how he covered for Harry and stuff. And I thought that was cool.
Oh, one point, again, the movie touched on very little, but it's one of my favorite aspects of that final Snape reveal, and it's in the books very clearly, but I don't think it shows it too much in the movie. You know how at the end when Voldemort's talking to Snape, I don't know if you noticed, but Snape is really staring at the snake a lot. So in one of the pensieve memories, I don't think the movie shows it, Dumbledore is talking to Snape and he says at some point, because Dumbledore knows that, or really assumes that the snake is one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. So he says at the end, Snape doesn't know about Harry hunting for the Horcruxes. Dumbledore tells Snape at the end, watch for Voldemort keeping his snake very close to him. And at that point, you need to go find Harry. And I forget the specific task, either help him get into Hogwarts or tell him the final instruction about him being the final Horcruxer. Something like that. I forget exactly. Mm-hmm. And so at the end, Snape sees the snake and he sees Voldemort acting weird and keeping the snake close to him. And so Snape keeps trying to tell Voldemort, like, let me leave and go do this for you. Because he's trying to leave to finally go tell Harry everything. Yeah. And he never gets that chance because Voldemort kills him, but then he gets Harry the memory. So that part was really tense in the book because Snape's like really wanting to go now because he knows this is prime time where he needs to get to Harry and tell him what's going on. I don't recall anything quite like that. Just a really intense part.
I can't wait to read the books. I mean, I'm really excited. How many times have you read the books?
I've read the first 3 like 4 times, and then the last a lot of times I don't know why I skip and I just go to 4 through 7, and I've read the last 4 through 7 like 5 or 6 times, give or take. There's some people who read it so many more times out there.
Wow, that's impressive.
There are people there that read it like once or twice every year. But yeah, I've read them each a few times.
So okay, help me with this. Okay, this is therapy. Okay, I'm on the couch now. Okay, therapy.
Can you please let me know? It would be a good visual aid.
No.
Okay.
I can barely make it through. Like, I get so caught up in nonfiction, I can barely make it through a fiction book one time, let alone, like, so what is it that keeps you coming back to fiction books that you've read? And, again, I was talking to a guy who goes to our church, and, like, the Jack Carr novels, the one that they just made the Terminal List. Like, he's like, oh yeah, I noticed that book on his, shelf or whatever. And he's like, oh yeah, I've read that like 3 times. And so what keeps people coming back to like reading the same fiction books over and over again? I feel like I've read it. I know what happens. So why do I need to read it again? What keeps you personally coming back?
There's a few things that really quickly come to mind. Oh, the first one is that wanting to really make something of myself for being a writer myself. Just simply reading as much fiction as possible just naturally boosts that skill. And so being able to dissect certain writing techniques or being able to pinpoint, wow, this, take notes on something that happened at the first book, like a question that I have, and then seeing it addressed later on. Now, that could be for any book, though. Repeating a book, At first, I didn't do that too much. I wanted to read every different book that I could. It is good to read a variety, but then I kind of realized if I have a favorite book that really does a lot for me, there's no reason why I shouldn't read it again. Now, I probably won't read Harry Potter again until maybe like my daughter does or something. But like I read Harry Potter first when I was around 10 years old, some of the earlier ones. I think I was 15 when the last one came out. And then say if I read it again, I just finished reading them through now when I'm 30. That's a huge, just a mental gap too, where it's a totally different kind of story that unfolds before me that I'm looking at different things that I would have if I were a 12-year-old or 20 years old. Another aspect is unlike a movie that's 2.5 hours long and it's visual right in front of you, with a book, there's a lot of details that I just forget. So even though I know Harry Potter very well, reading it through this last time, there were a ton of things that this minor details that I appreciate going through and remembering that I had forgotten. So those are a couple reasons right there.
No, I like that. That's fair enough. Like on that last one, I can identify with that. Obviously, I don't believe the Bible is fiction. I believe it's true. But the same thing happens for me with the Bible. I mean, yeah, I've read the whole thing cover to cover a few times. I think a few times now. But yeah, like I'm going back and trying to read just slower now. And, it's like, oh man, like I don't remember this. Like obviously you remember the big rocks. You remember the big ones that you learned in Sunday school, right? But then like there's a lot of other ones like, the widow who was, or not widow, but the concubine who was abused in Gibeah that the guy cut up and sent her body parts to all of the tribes of Israel to like wake them up to their sin. And it's like, okay, I vaguely remember that, but I didn't remember any of the details behind it and like why that happened and what consequence that had and just all those little details and things. And with the Bible, of course, one of the cool things that you can do is like go back and read with different lenses, and so you can be you can be specifically looking for, okay, well, what on this read through of this text or this, like, what does it say about prayer, or what does it say about, managing your money, managing your time, or what is, about these different things. It's like you can take different lessons depending on the lens through which you're reading it. Like if you're looking to, if you're reading the Bible with the idea that you want to learn something is different than reading the Bible for the idea that you want to do something with what you've learned, right? And so it's like even that. So it's many different ways that you can read things. So I guess it's kind of the same thing there. Different perspectives on different read-throughs.
I agree. I actually that's a really good thought, especially nonfiction and specifically the Bible. Like I've gone through before and read parts where literally my one focus is on what does the Bible say about like God's character and who God is. Like other stuff, like I kind of like would still read, but skim through and literally just really focusing on certain aspects. And it's the same thing for fiction reading too. I guess as I read fiction, I try to really encompass everything because I don't want to have to read through the first Harry Potter book 50 times and focus on one specific thing each time. But yeah, just really trying to write down specific questions that you have and work that through. Interesting. Kind of backtracking a little bit, but a thought that I had earlier that I forgot. Rowling was very good at foreshadowing things early on in her books. One of Stephen King's rules is that if someone ends up pulling a gun from a mantelpiece to use it in a scene, you better, mention that gun on the mantelpiece at the start of the scene or when they walk into the room.
Oh, and, right.
I'm sure there's parts where she didn't do that in her books because there's so many, but for the most part, heck, remember the Vanishing Cabinet in book 6? I mean, that goes all the way back to, I think, book 1. Pretty sure book 1 when it's first mentioned. I mean, just some really wild stuff that she really had thought out. Just excellent.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's really something.
I think that concludes all of my remarks on Harry. I mean, I'm sure we could talk for hours more going into different things, but kind of high level, that kind of covers it.
Yeah, man. No, that's great. It was a fantastic series to watch, and I'm really excited to read the books. I know I say this every time we really get to talking about fiction, but I've got to get more into fiction because it's just so much more relaxing. And I make plenty of time to learn with nonfiction. I am in no danger of reading so much fiction that I'll never read nonfiction. That's definitely not my problem. I need to get more. It's like right now I'm working through a book, and God help me, some people are so good at being like, at like just stopping when they're like not really getting what they want from a book and then moving on to the next thing. I am not good at it. I am.
Power through it.
I look for the way I treat a book is if there's almost no book that I can't take one nugget of amazing applicable wisdom to my life. And I definitely have FOMO around that. Like, I'm just like, okay, I really feel like I can get something from this book. And so I'm like always looking for whatever that is. And then if it doesn't, and then anything beyond that is a bonus. And most of the time when I read a book, I end up there's bonuses, right? There's a lot more than just that one thing. And so I'm working through a book right now called The 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma. And it's a fictional, it's a parable, right? It's a business parable. It's like sort of the genre. And so its point is to teach business lessons, but it teaches those business lessons in the context of a story. And it's one of the longer ones that I've ever read. And it's really wearing on me. And so anyway, I'm trying desperately to make it through and get it done. It's not terrible. It's got, it's not like it's a bad book. It's just, there's a lot of, if you will, review for me of stuff that I know and that I've but it's good to be reminded of. But it's like, yeah, it's a fiction book and I'm just having a hard time. It's fiction, but obviously you're supposed to teach real life lessons. And it's kind of hard to get through, but I'm a sucker. I just can't put it down. I've got to power through it and finish it and then move on to the next book. So it's just
interesting.
A weakness. Yeah.
It's very different, but reminds me of something that happened to me one time. I must have been 11 or so. It was my first read through of the Thomas Covenant books. I had just finished the first one and we were going on a road trip to Florida. My parents drove through the night, so a 24-hour drive, and I never slept. I just couldn't sleep in the car. So I was really excited to dive into the second book and just read it all night long. Right at the get-go, I never had this problem before except for that week traveling to and from Florida. Reading the book, I couldn't picture the images in my mind. Like the words were not forming images in my mind. And so I was just reading words and just nothing was connecting. And it was, and I was so frustrated. And I put the book down, gave it a break, read it, and my mind just couldn't do it. It was the weirdest thing. It never happened to me again since then. But I remember just that frustrated feeling on not being able to just picture what the author wanted me to.
Yeah. Well, I kind of have that with this book that I'm talking about. And
it sounds
part
like
of it, part of the problem, here's the problem. The book is either using, there's no middle ground. So another book that's in this genre is called The Go-Giver. And it's just fantastic. Like, it's short, it's to the point. There's this, like, the story and the lesson are like really well tied together and it doesn't string you along. This book, it's like there's no middle ground. It will spend an arduous amount of time. I've been using that word a lot lately. Anyway, it will spend it will use a lot of time in like this almost woo-woo, mystical.
You've been using that word a lot too. Woo-woo.
Just elevate yourself and awaken your power. It's just like true, world changers do blah, 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 blah. And then it will all of a sudden transition to like this ultra tactical 16-step framework with sub points and like this, that, and the other thing. And it's just like, what are you doing to me? It's like in 1 second, it is in the clouds. And then the next second, it's like 8 foot under the earth. And I'm just like, can we just get to eye level with this thing? And so it's anyway, I need to just stop.
Sounds like a disaster.
At this point, I'm like 60, almost 70% of the way through the book. And so I'm just like, I'm wanting to get done with it so I can move on to something that is either more practical or more fictional, but I gotta move on to something else. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
Absolutely. Well, cheers. Good deal, Steve.
Yeah, man. So,
why don't we conclude this podcast with kind of maybe giving a brief update on what's going on in the life of Steve and the life of your boy Al.
Yeah, sounds good. You want to go first? I feel like
I'll kick it away. Yeah, you have. I wasn't going to say anything, but since you brought it up.
Sure.
I will be billing you for my time. Uh,
Oh no,
uh,
I can't afford you.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, a quick update for me. I've actually been really writing, very quickly through, the first draft of my book. I'd say on probably around 25 to 30% of the way through it. And, I've
Awesome.
put a big dent in it just recently, and I'm just really cruising through it. My goal, I don't want to say all out because I feel like it'll jinx it, but I have a pretty good goal to get this done in a shorter amount of time than I thought. And it would just be great to get that first draft off my shoulders so I can work on the second draft and then send it out to my man Steve and a couple other of close friends and family to read through that. So good news there. I'm hoping I can power through it and have some updates on that. And then starting, I'm hoping within the next 2-3 weeks at the very tops, doing my own podcast finally, taking all the tips and tricks that Steve has taught me. And, it's basically going to be it's going to start out, as like an analysis of books. The first series I'm actually going to read through is Dune just because part 2 is coming out. So I'm just going to go kind of chapter by chapter and give my own thoughts and opinions on each chapter and each segment and kind of walk through it and give my opinions on it. And then I think I'll probably naturally branch out. If I hear things about Harry Potter coming out, I'll review probably that show, even though the first season of Rings of Power was I'll probably watch the second one. And so it'll probably be an all encompassing fictional fantasy thing, but, mostly though to promote my writing and, that's the goal of it, but it'll be fun just to talk about fiction along the way and enjoy reading and reading stuff and sharing my opinions on all that. So hopefully that'll launch soon.
Cool, man. Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, so on my end, really not, I'm kind of in, if you will, maintenance mode on a lot of the things that are going on my end, which is good. It's usually good that if I'm not branching out too far into other things. Probably, it's been since the last update that I did a sort of relaunch of my coaching platform for my business and for basically I help web designers build business with recurring revenue. And so taking the lessons that I've learned from the last 7 or 8 years and building my own agency. And so that has really started to pick up some steam and get some new blood in there. And so the podcast on that end and everything is doing well. So I'm excited for that. I had a little bit of lull in my web design client work. So if you're listening out there and you need a website, hey, come hit me up. Had a little bit of lull in the client work there. But it's kind of being made up for, if you will, with the other stuff. So that's kind of helping and really good. So the other thing I'm thinking through right now is so for a while, the first thing that I ever really did on the internet was started my blog on ministry stuff, talking about apologetics and theology and all of that. It's kind of one of those weird things because it feels like I've been doing that forever, but it's only been since April of 2017, I think, that website even went live. And so it's only, 6 years. It's not a short amount of time, but it's not an overly long amount of time either. And so it's kind of hard to believe. But so for the last couple 3 years, it's actually been sort of on hiatus. I've been keeping up podcasts going, like the Winsome Creationist and the Bible Nerd podcast, and that's on hiatus now too. But anyway, I've been doing things here and there, but I had stopped actually producing new content for that blog, just because of business commitments and things like that. So I was telling Alex beforehand that I recently sort of, and I won't go on all into it here for time, but most of you have probably turned this off by now anyway. But I
don't say that, Steve.
I just recently have, kind of had an epiphany, if you will, on how I could work in some of my thoughts on business and marketing and theology and just creation and just a lot of the things that I'm interested in and how they can all kind of come together under one umbrella. So I'm sort of going to start working on that and maybe start doing some more writing over there again. And, maybe pulling in podcast episodes with the RSS feeds and some things like that, just to kind of start building up the content on that site again, because it's already got a good amount of traffic. Like, that site gets trafficked quite a bit from blog articles that I wrote a long time ago. And so I kind of feel like I could just very easily pick up with it and start getting some traction on that again. The big thing is that I don't want to do it just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, there's definitely going to need to be a business plan around it, right? A monetization plan. And it gets into a lot of things. It gets into writing. I mean, obviously I love to write books. I've written 4 so far. I'm working on another one. And so I really want a place to still be able to promote that and just keep writing. And, it's kind of like if you will, this is my retirement plan, right? Is to have some sort of ministry / business that is educating people on the realities of marketing and business and the Bible and theology and all of that. And let me just say this. This is not, so let's get out of update territory and go just kind of to this one extra little topic here. Bonus topic. Okay. Bonus topic. I don't want to say that I've been struggling with this, because I don't want to over dramatize it.
Please do.
But well, so I was watching a Dana White interview the other day, and for those of you who don't know, Dana White is the president of the UFC. He's got like 10% ownership in the UFC, and he's a beast when it comes to business, and just he's a real beast. And he made a comment in this interview. He was like, "Well, I've always known that I wanted to be in the fight business." And obviously, he's not the only person to have some sort of dream or some sort of grand purpose or just whatever when it comes to his work. But I can't help but notice that the people who are driven by something bigger and specific persist and stay with it and are trying to build something that goes beyond just showing up to work every day. And showing up to work every day is perfectly respectable. It's respectable whether you have a job or whether you own a business or whatever. You like your job. I know, Alex, you like your job, but of course, I don't necessarily think it's like your ultimate dream was to do what you're doing at your full-time job, even though you do like it. And in fact, you might even love it. And that might be fair to say. I love what I do. I love my business. Part of what I want to do is business, right? Is just have a port. And so in that regard, I like what we do and all that. But it's definitely not like, I definitely couldn't say something like, yeah, I just always known I wanted to be in the web design business, because that's not true, right? And so I have been sort of thinking, okay, well, obviously this is what I do right now. It's what I'm good at. I do love marketing. So it's not that I don't love it. I love working with my clients and all that. All of that is great. But none of that is the thing that I would say, oh, well, like 20, 25, 30 years from now, or just whatever. Like, did my lights just change? I think my lights just changed.
It did.
That was kind of weird. A little spooky. None of those things are like what I would say, oh, I've just always wanted to do this sort of thing. And so I kind of know what that is, right? It's in that it's in the ministry realm, but it's definitely more in that, like, not full-time vocational ministry necessarily. It's going to be more about thought leadership and writing and things along that nature. So anyway, what I said all of that to say that I'm just trying to make sure that I have something going, even if it's in the background, to kind of like keep that alive, so that when I do make a transition to that more full-time or whatever, like, it makes sense and there's a plan there, and there's assets built up that and all of that. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. Some I've been thinking through lately. And so that's what I'm really working on, transforming SteveSchramm.com, my blog, into the ecosystem and the hub for that. And what that's going to look like is bringing more business related content into what is already a lot of marketing content, or excuse me, a lot of just ministry and theology content.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
When you put that into practice and work through it, keep me updated on that.
Yeah, I will. It'll be, I'm sure it'll be part of what we'll talk about going forward.
Every time I talk about this stuff, I'm just glad that my one focus is writing fiction.
Makes it so easy, right?
And that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the intro still says that you're a wannabe game designer, though. So I mean, there is
Oh.
another. I don't know.
I think I will. I think I'll always want to be that. And then when it came down to the wire, you just only have so much time in the day.
100%. Yeah, I got you. Okay, man. Well,
All right,
it's been
Steve.
great.
Great episode. Good talking with you as usual.
As always, yes, sir. And the pleasure's all mine.